My, what a sparkling session. Perking up what could have otherwise been a very dull, laid-back Sunday. I would request the audience to settle down. I know there are sessions going on, in the right wing as well. This was, by the way, on the left wing, in case you didn't notice. So while I welcome the next speaker, I'd also request the audience to settle down. Let me also hear it from the organizers if we are indeed ready to start the next one. We are? Somebody has lost it. I mean the keys. If this chain of keys belongs to you, please, I'm going to keep it at the console so you can pick it up from there. May I request people to my left to please settle down on your seats. Mohandas Pai, namaskara, daivittu. Yeah. Yet again, I'm in the position of introducing or giving the introduction for a man who really needs no introduction. And he is, I think at last count, he's written 8 books on the history of India. And I'm going to just read out some of these. He is a national spokesperson, of course, of the Bharatiya Janata Party. He also happens to be the Rajya Sabha Member of Parliament from Jharkhand. His books include Byline, Nehru, The Making of India, Kashmir, Behind the Veil, Riot After Riot, and India, The Siege Within. Some of these books. Please, let's give it up for M.G. Akbar.
Mohan, please, until you sit down, I don't have the courage to start. Ladies and gentlemen, and the organizers of this festival, thank you really very, very much for the privilege and the honor of being in an absolutely glorious city. Little bit of hangover comment. Since I think Tipu Sultan was being discussed, and I couldn't resist. Somebody actually asked me at some point, what do you think of Tipu Sultan, and so on. And this was a book event at Jamia, and I said that. Seeing the passions that rise over something that happened in 1770, 1780, 1790, 1798, I said, why don't we expend this kind of passion on the next 200 years rather than the last 200 years? Seriously, are we going to build India for the next 200 years or not? I think this is a good segue into the theme of what I hope to talk about today. This has been a week in which we have variously remembered the Constitution. We have the past is much with us. It is I'm not saying it merely because it's a nice thing to say, but it is my genuine belief that India is going to be the defining nation of the 21st century. Now, this is not going to happen only because of economic growth. We tend to think of success as merely an aspect of economic growth. Economic growth is extremely important. No one can discount it. No one can underestimate it. More than economic growth, equitable economic growth. But I'll come to that later. But if you look at the world just now, some of the richest countries in the world are in total despair. So while the economy is very good, quite clearly it is not good enough as a binder or as a center of gravity or as a center of... So what then is it in our experience in modern India that makes me make such an ambitious claim, a claim that might be considered even preposterous, or a claim that would be dismissed as some form of ultra-nationalism, maybe even self-deception? Absolutely. I make this claim out of one perception. The nation that we have, which is the modern India, a reborn India, is built around our constitution. To understand a constitution, why do we call the constitution historic? You can never understand anything historic until you understand what the historical moment was when history was being not written, but when history was being made. So what was the historical moment that 1947 represented? There is an easy and even an obvious answer, and an answer that must have occurred to all of you, since you are an aware, literate, educated audience. That 1947, 1950, this period represents the collapse of European colonization. That if European colonization did begin in India, and trust me, it did begin in India, and European colonization began on the banks of the Hooghly River. I was actually born in one of the small jute mill towns with the French to my left in Chandanagar, to the Danes to my right in Sirampur, and the original traders, the Portuguese, right there in Bandel, all within 10 miles. In fact, that Hooghly River was the first European common market of its time, started in 16th century. So, the colonization process, yes, did begin in India. And it began in India, trust me. It didn't begin in India because India was a poor country. Nobody is interested in conquering a poor country. No one is interested in. After all, the cost of conquest must be worth the return. No one is interested in conquering the deserts of Arabia and the deserts of Iraq until they discovered fossil fuel there. So this was a rich country. The statistics of 1750 prove it. In 1750, when I think these statistics first started getting recorded, India had 24% of world manufacturing output. It was called world manufacturing output. 24%. Of course, we're talking United India. China had 31%. Britain had 1.8, less than 2%. Around 1%. Russia had 3 or 4%. America didn't exist in its modern avatar at that time. India and China, between them, had 50% of the world manufacturing. That means one good out of every 4 created in the world was created in India. That is why we were wealthy. This Ganga Jamuna agricultural belt was a source of enormous wealth. We had science, we had technology. One of the great writers, one of the first great sociological treatises on India by this 13th century Central Asian who came with Ghazni's troops. Al-Baruni, yes. He mentions there, he sees a tank, water tank. And he says, look at the marvelous engineering that is required for this. He said, if we had this knowledge skills, if we had this knowledge, what could we have done in water-starved Central Asia and in our deserts? And so on and so forth. We were the model for the world. So, These figures, by the way, I didn't pick up from the latest propaganda bulletin from the government of India. They are there in Paul Kennedy's book, The Rise and Fall of Nations. Paul Kennedy is a historian teaching at Yale. So if India began the history of European colonization, also India begins the history of European decolonization. In fact, the first attempt by European colonists to replace colonization with neo-colonization from 1920 onwards, particularly in the Middle East and the Arab world, even neo-colonization, the model was formed in India. And what was the model? The princely states. And what were the princely states? The princely states were a strategic alliance. The strategic alliance means that the British would protect the interests of one family, not of the people. Would protect the interests of one ruling family, and in return that ruling family would protect the strategic interests of the British, the defense interests of the British, and so on and so forth. As they did, the history that you were just discussing is replete with alliances, which are totally, in fact, totally non-communal. The Nizam of Hyderabad was fighting alongside the British against Mysore under Tipu. So, and what is neo-colonization? Neo-colonization is a grant of independence on condition you never exercise it. Yeah, that is what it is. So even the neo-colonization model was actually fashioned and turned into a political art or craft through the Indian experience. So if both these models begin to collapse in science, but I tell you, the real historical moment is something much, much, much larger than mere collapse of colonization. Between 1850, if you stretch it, and you add another 20 years behind to include the Spanish, between 1850 and 1950, every single empire that has controlled the geopolitics of the world and given it a semblance of stability even within its wars, every single empire known in history collapsed. That is the true significance, which means the Chinese empire collapsed. The much later Japanese empire collapsed. The Indian empire collapsed. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. The Russian Empire collapsed. The Safavid Empire collapsed in Iran. The Habsburg Empire collapsed. And eventually, the Italian, French, and British empires collapsed. Every single political structure that had held the world together for nearly 1,000 years, in one form or the other, through all its, everything collapsed. Reminds me of that unknown poet Matthew Arnold's famous two lines. If he has not written a third line, I don't care, but these two lines are immortal. One world is dead and the other hasn't been born. Now, don't ever confuse history with your own lifetimes or with our lifetimes. When history is written, we'd be bloody lucky to get 2 paragraphs in our lifetimes. So 100 years in historical terms is not, nothing pretty exuberant. History takes its time. But this is the real challenge before the world. That as all the other structures collapsed, and what replaced it? The idea of a nation state replaced it. Right? Now we understand nation state, after all, is a subproduct of nationalism. Nationalism is not a modern concept. Nationalism has existed even under the age of empires. But modern nation, what shall be the modern nation? That is the challenge, and therefore, this is the real trouble we have today, or the real challenge of the present moment is this, that if the challenge before the 19th century was the end of colonization, then the challenge of half of the 20th century and the 21st century is, what do modern nations do with nationalism? What is going to be the content of your nationalism? What are you going to do with your state? And this is where the Indian Constitution becomes the most important document of the post-colonial world and for the post-colonial world. Because at its essence, the Indian Constitution defines the meaning of modernity, not of nationalism. Nationalism you can have even if you're not modern. I do not consider Pakistan, for instance, to be a modern state for a variety, nothing to do with Pakistanis, because of the idea. But you can't say that Pakistanis don't have nationalism. Of course they have nationalism. All you have to do is watch them playing cricket. They have more nationalism than talent. So what is modernity? And this is the key question that confronts, and that is the cause of so much civil strife and turbulence. If you want to understand civil strife and turbulence, you can stand in Bangalore as much as in Delhi, because in a straight line. Don't look east. Stand here, don't look east, because east you have a positive notes coming. And by the way, what I'm saying is nothing to do with the fact that there may be Muslims to our west, because if you look demographically, there are as many Muslims to our east as there are to our west. Between Indonesia, Bangladesh, Malaysia and Burma, there are more Muslims to our east. So this is not to be confused with communities. And that is going to be one of the themes I'm trying to suggest. But if you look at the East, you will find broadly, by and large, maybe some nations are still a work in progress, but by and large, people are seeking towards the urges of compatibility, modernity, and so on. But if you look to our West, you will find from the banks of the Ravi is the river near Lahore, next to Amritsar. So from the edge of Amritsar right up to Morocco, barring maybe 2 or 3 exceptions, and maybe, a year earlier I might have said 4 or 5. Barring 2 or 3 exceptions, you will find increasingly large tracts of region where the governments of the region are not in control of the territory. Now, this doesn't mean that no one is in control of that territory. Someone is in control of that territory. They are militias. They are militias rising in the name of religion or rising in the name of some other cause or whatever might be. And this is the impact of failure to understand what to do with modernity. Now, what is modernity? It's a word I've already used more often than is good for it. Modernity, in my view, and this again formed the 4 pillars of the Indian Constitution, has 4 non-negotiable facts, 4 non-negotiable principles. Number 1, we all know, liberty. You cannot be a modern nation without individual liberty, collective liberty. And I don't care how many years pass, but liberty is still defined by Voltaire, which is, I may not agree with you, but I will defend to the death your right to say so, to hold your views. I only wish occasionally that those who demand Voltaire's rights would occasionally offer the same rights to others. Second, and this is an extremely important component of modernity, faith equality. Now, I could have said secularism. Secularism is a word in our constitution, and I have no compunctions about that word. I consider myself as secular as anyone else, and I'm proud of the fact that I hold these traditions and hold these values. in my maiden speech in the Rajya Sabha, I said to anyone, they have absolutely no problem with calling myself not only secular, but getting competitive about it also. But what is the meaning of this word? This word is a European word. It comes out of two contexts. One is the context of Voltaire again, Voltaire and Rousseau, which is the French Revolution. Briefly put, basically secularism is the separation of church and state. You all know what it means. There is a second interpretation of secularism. That interpretation was given by another great intellectual, Karl Marx, where he condemned religion as the opium of the masses, and in fact eliminated the church from social life altogether. In our country, secularism is not either the separation of church and state or the elimination of religion. Our secularism certainly forbids the state from having any religion, which is an extremely important element. The state cannot have any religion. But our secularism is the equality of every faith before the law. And I tell you, that is less important than the second part of it. The second part of it is equality of every faith in social life and behavior. Our secularism does not belong merely to the law, it belongs to the iman of this country. It belongs to the belief systems of this country. Our secularism is much older than European secularism, much, much older than European secularism. Our secularism was defined by Swami Vivekananda. Just to give you an occasional, in 1890s, there is no debate on these issues, but when Swami Vivekananda comes and says, he is asked, how do you make a strong nation? And he says very simply, and I tell you very effectively, if you are born in a Hindu household, be a good Hindu. If you are born in a Muslim household, be a good Muslim. If you are born in a Christian household, be a good Christian, and born in a Sikh, and so on and so on. Be true to your faith, you'll be true to yourself. You'll be true to yourself, you'll be morally strong. You'll be morally strong, we'll have a great nation. Gandhiji called our secularism Ram Rajya. Was Gandhiji communal? Ask yourself. Was it communal? Why did he call it Ram Rajya? He was referring to an ideal which is part of the philosophical and emotional memory of our people. That is what he was, and that is why he got the response he did. He did not need a lesson in faith equality from anyone abroad. And that is why, and I am extremely proud of the fact that India is the only nation in the world, only nation in the world which has audible secularism. What does this mean? It means that when you you are woken up in the morning by the azan, and following the azan comes the ringing of the Hanuman temple's bells, following which comes the recitation of the Guru Granth Sahib, following which comes the church bells. There is no country in the world where all four can be heard. Anyone wants to go abroad in search of secularism? I can promise you that in London and Washington and Paris you will not hear the azan. And the azan has been heard in India for 1400 years and will be heard in India for the next 1400 years. You're going to go abroad in search of our values? Our values. And that is why I tell you, India is a misconception. India was not secular because Gandhiji was secular. Gandhiji was secular because India is secular. And by secularism, it is the belief in the equality of all faiths, all creeds, in the equality of atheism also. Want to be an atheist? Most welcome. You deal with what happens after death. Huh? Don't call for help after that. But it's your privilege. This is the meaning of liberty. Liberty of faith. And for God's sake, I appeal to you, yes, Indians are human beings. Indians will go wrong. Somebody will scream, somebody will shout, somebody will say the wrong thing. Never blame India for the sins of Indians. Never blame the nation for the sins of some Indians. By the way, by these two criteria, China may be a successful country, but it is not a modern nation. It's still, and I tell you, in this visible contest between one nation, two states, or one state, two nations, between China and Hong Kong, Beijing and Hong Kong, I wouldn't be surprised if history's answer lies in favor of Hong Kong rather than Beijing. There is no faith equality in China. I would challenge any communist who adores China to come and discuss and say they will impose the Chinese model in India. Just tell them, ask them, whether they will impose the Xinjiang model where you can't do Ramzan, where you can't do Friday prayers, whether they will impose the Tibet model, and what is happening to Buddhism there. Don't give me hype about China, for God's sake. Number three, gender equality. You cannot be a modern nation anywhere without gender equality. It's not possible. It's absurd to believe. And one of the great sadnesses I have is to watch Muslim nations actually undergo gender regression rather than moving forward. And the sadness lies in an important historical fact that in the 7th century when Islam came, Islam was a very revolutionary message on gender issues. In the 7th century, the rights it gave to women were inconceivable. It was not total alimony, but it gave some form of alimony. It gave inheritance rights. We had to wait for inheritance rights in the Hindu Code Bill of 1955. So the sadness, in fact, I said perhaps, I don't know if it sounds politically correct to say so or not, but I'm going to say it nevertheless. Muslim society should have been ahead of other societies in gender equality. Instead, we are slipping behind. Why? This is one of the great weaknesses. And fourth, now gender equality in our nation has acquired a momentum of its own. Nobody can reverse it. Trust me, nobody can reverse it. And it will easily, even parties which are hesitant, for example, against induction. We are already seeing women now even in the armed forces. Against induction of women at the political level, are hesitant to argue their case. So, from 1955 till 2015 has been a massive revolution in thinking, approach, and so on. And we are doing it on a basis of economic empowerment. One of the most important programs of the present government, which, good news is not news, unfortunately, but what to do? One of the most important empowerment programs is the Mudra Bank. The Mudra Bank, I don't know how many of you are aware, is giving loans between small loans, 50,000, 2 lakhs, that kind of a spectrum I may not be totally correct, but it's broadly that kind of spectrum, to people who have no collateral. Individual business persons or people who are doing small businesses. Thelawala. After all, he's also doing a business, he's taking credit, and he's taking credit from non-banking sources. That means he's paying a bigger bomb than the most famous businessman of Bangalore. And he's also paying back his loans, by the way, unlike the most famous businessman of Bangalore. It's for them. One of the most interesting, 42,000, almost 43,000 crores has already been dispersed. This figure is going to go to 130,000. That means around 77 lakh new businesses under the radar have been started with maybe the capability of creating 3 jobs, 5 jobs. Right? The barber who is sitting on the roadside is the person who can ask. He's also doing a business. He's also an entrepreneur. But the most interesting fact about it is that 34 or 35% of the loans have gone to women. Now that to my mind is true gender equality. That to my mind is not theorizing. And over again, the experience of all our social benefit programs has shown that women can be trusted with money far more than men. And this is an obvious fact, actually. This is an obvious fact. Because which woman is going to feed herself before she feeds her children? No one. No woman feeds herself before the children. No man feeds the children before he feeds himself. It's true. The man has excuses, thak ke aaya, I'm done hard day's labor, give me food now. And if there's any surplus, give me something to go. The social responsibility of women is one of the great assets. I tell you, of any society. It's been proven in the Grameen experiment in Bangladesh. It's been proven elsewhere as well. So this thrust that is being given in economic programs is the true meaning of gender equality. And finally, the fourth is economic equity. There is nothing called economic equality, right? Forget about it, it's not going to happen. But you cannot be a modern nation if you have extreme poverty of the kind we have today. You cannot be a modern nation. This is the most significant challenge of the next 10 years. Right? The poor must feel that they are part of the rising narrative, of the narrative of rising economics. They cannot be removed from it. By the way, the poor are not fools. They don't believe that if you're born in a hut, you're going to die in a palace. But they do believe that if they were born eating only 2 chapatis a day, they have a right to 4 chapatis before they die. Is that too much to ask? Is it too much to ask that they should have a roof? That they should have water? And if we cannot provide them, then we have failed. There are 500 million Indians. 500 million Indians who live in the uncertainty of shadows. And there is no shadow more perilous than the shadow of hunger. No shadow. Only those who have no hunger can understand what I mean. Listen, we please ourselves, we content ourselves, we bluff ourselves by saying that yes, look at how far we have progressed in 1950 when the Planning Commission was born. Actually, the Planning Commission is a constitutional requirement. And I say this because the alleviation of hunger is a constitutional requirement. That's why I call our constitution a modern document. The phrase then used in 1950 was that the state shall do whatever for hunger alleviation. But, and I'm not being partisan, but I'd still tell you it is worth repetition. at my Prime Minister, the present Prime Minister, our Prime Minister. The most important statement he made, again, these things go under the radar and are forgotten, but in my view, the most important statement he made was in his very first intervention in Parliament, Lok Sabha, when he said, and I know when he began saying this, there was sort of everybody was looking around a bit startled. He said, the age of poverty alleviation is over. And there was nervousness, palpable nervousness, not least in the treasury ranks. Until he added, the era of hunger elimination has begun. We cannot be content with alleviation anymore. There has to be elimination. In 1950, statistics, whatever rough statistics say, that the number of Indians living below the poverty line was 65%. Today, according to the Rangarajan Commission, which submitted its report to Dr. Manmohan Singh, that figure has come down to 32% or 30%, whatever you want to call it. Now, if like you and I, we have had 3 meals a day and don't have a 4th meal only because a doctor has strictly forbidden us from having one, this sounds like a tremendously pleasing and self-congratulatory kind of statistic. Stop fooling yourself. This is not the question that the poor are asking. Those living below the poverty line are asking a completely different question. That if it has taken you 70 years to come down from 65 to 30, is it going to take you another 70 years to come from 30 to 0? That is the important question. And they will not give you 70 years anymore. They will not give you the pleasures of Bhashan in Royal Arcade anymore. Believe me, they will not. They will not give you the luxury of literary festivals. You have to make literary festivals part of their lives. And do it within the foreseeable future. And this is not going to happen anymore by state sector jobs. You know, the government as an institution of providing jobs, frankly, if it is not dead, is on its deathbed. Public sector, we know its limitations. The only answer is to governments must become enablers of private entrepreneurs. And private entrepreneurs have to move away. Our definition of private entrepreneurs has to move away from the corporate sector. The corporate sector is fine. It has to do its bit and grow and, may it grow continuously for 300% every year. Very good. But the real answer lies in the creation of a new sector. And this sector was once again defined by the Prime Minister during his speech in America, where he said we have to move away from the binary of the public sector and the private sector and pay attention to a third sector called the personal sector. And this is the personal sector of the Mudra Bank, where a woman who can start earning her livelihood with 10 chickens, that is the personal sector. With 1 cow. I know in my state, Jharkhand, there is a movement to provide economic sustenance. Create a milk revolution. It is this which is our greatest challenge. A nation, of course, has legacy issues. And these legacy issues exhaust the oxygen of media debate, of our emotional attention. We cannot ignore that our history includes something very dramatic. Because what happened in 47? In 47, both the idea of modernity, that means that a nation should be born on the basis of faith equality, and the idea, which is the antithesis of faith equality, which is faith supremacy, that one faith shall be supreme in a nation state, both were given birth. And that state obviously was Pakistan, which became the first Islamic state. When people talk about Daesh today, and say that it's the first Islamic state, they just display a lack of understanding, or they are history neutral. The first Islamic state was Pakistan. And I say this in a real sense, not merely as a descriptive sense. I mean, we can go and have another lecture on that, but that's... The second Islamic state was Taliban Afghanistan. The third Islamic state was Boko Haram. This presence in Iraq, Caliphate in Iraq, is the fourth such Islamic jihadi state, not the first. And this space is expanding. How many of you are aware of the fact that a large chunk of northern Afghanistan now is controlled by Daesh, or otherwise known as ISIS? That the interlinkages between these various I didn't want to use caliphates because actually the caliphate was a pretty sensible idea for its time. And here, however, is something that we should worry us too. What happens when you don't make a nation modern? After all, there are many places which don't believe in these four principles. Or they slip up on one, or they slip up on two, whatever. But what happens when you don't give this package? Then enters something which I have described in a piece in Foreign Affairs as the romance of regression. You begin to regress into searching for an artificial past, an imagined past. And through that imagined past, romanticization of the imagined past, you try and create legitimacy for your present rule. It's known in many societies. We should be wary of it too. You never ever forget that the first Khilafat movement was here. So this imagined past is basically I'm getting a happy signal. I have only 10 minutes. Thank you. I'm relieved actually. I thought I have to push for at least 15 or 20. So, and my IQ is depleting at a very sharp pace. No, I don't. You know, you must always remember the Sachin Tendulkar principle. Leave when people ask why, not when they ask when. So, no, I admire Sachin Tendulkar. Suddenly, in case somebody decides to consider this intolerance. So it is the romance of regression which becomes a very proactive, and it is there spreading in a vacuum everywhere, and this is going to be the major challenge. Our security is not immune from this. Our security and faith supremacists, by the way, can be from any faith. They are not faith exclusive. From any faith. So we have to, those of us who want to protect our nation's modernity, because these are the symbols. The history of insecurity in India has goes back a deep way. In fact, in my book, Tinderbox, how can I come to a literary festival and not plug my book? It's absurd. It's an oxymoron, anachronism. But one of the themes, the opening sentence of, the opening challenge of the book is, what is a minority? What is a minority? Second question, did Muslims of India consider themselves minority under Mughal rule? Their population was the same. In fact, it was much less. Did the Muslims of Hyderabad in 1948 consider themselves a minority when the Nizam was ruling? And the answer is no. Because minority and majority are not a function of numbers. They are a function of empowerment. If any community feels empowered, it does not consider itself as a minority. I'm only being quasi-facetious when I say that I have to choose my words with such extreme care now. I'm only being quasi-facetious when I say the Brahmins represent only 1% of the country or 2%. Which Brahmin ever considers himself a minority? Empowered. Socially empowered. See, just as Muslims were, felt. It does not mean they were all economically empowered. There was as much poverty among Muslims. So, there are many questions that lie embedded in a history which we must have the courage actually to raise without, falling into the trap of partisan and, becoming aggression and so on and so forth. Actually, sometimes when I see history being dragged into aggression, it pains me as at least part-time historian or somebody who's in love with history without necessarily being, and sometimes who has learnt a great deal from the past. The past is not a source of anger. The past is a source of learning in order to protect the future. And if we can't protect the future, we have failed ourselves and failed our children. We have failed our children. One could go on this subject, but one must stick to the basic necessities of time discipline for one basically non-negotiable reason, a reason which is compelling, compulsive, and demanding, which is that 1 o'clock lunchtime comes. Okay. So that any speaker with the courage to disobey that rule is going to be booed off the stage. But I will end with just one thought. And this I said again in Parliament. And I ended my speech there on this thought, and I hope this is a suitable way of ending our interaction today. I said I looked at all sides of the House. The Parliament was very gracious. I'm really deeply grateful to them, because from all sides of the House, everybody was kind enough to listen, and no disturbances, no nothing. I ended by saying that, look, we are all in some political party or the other. We'll have so many reasons to fight, squabble, compete. But why don't we try and agree on one thing? Try. And let's not get into this business of who's to blame. I can name 10 things you were wrong with. You can name 10 things I was wrong with. We phas jayenge usme, so that nothing will emerge out of it. I said, let's just try and agree on one thing. Are we, as political parties of modern India, going to fight each time the last election of the last 25 years, or are we going to fight the first election of the next 25 years? I said, the day you come to a clarity and an answer on this, there will be no vivad. There will be no argument. Compete for the future. And what are you worried, Why are you scrambling for the immediate, the medium, or the far past? And I said, in case you do not know the answer to this question, go around to anyone who's 25 years old or lower, go around to even a 30-year-old and lower. They know the answer. We may or may not. But the young know the answer. The young want to know precisely. They want to know what are you going to doing about 20,050. They're not even interested in what you want to do, what you did or going to do about 1947. I said, they know. This is what they want. They are your voters. Do you realize that ever since Ever since Rajiv Gandhi lowered the voting age to 18, no central government apart from 2009 has been re-elected. Of course, 2009 is going to be repeated in 2019. That's a separate issue. No, seriously. Unless you address the concerns of the young, how can you create a future for them? I am absolutely sure that change is not going to come through any magic wand. But I can tell you, and I'm very delighted to tell you, everyone in the corridors later on was appreciative and said, yes, at some point we have to get the narrative right. And if we can get the narrative right, we will have lived up to the expectations that both those who created this great constitution, every nation of the post-colonial world will eventually have to come and accept the tenets of these 4 tenets of the Indian constitution. Otherwise, they cannot do it only by creating economic wealth. Because as the Bible said, man doesn't live by bread alone. They will have to come and address liberties, faith equality, gender equality. All 4. You can't negotiate your way through this package. And so, if we have any care for the future, I hope we will create. But I tell you, I know it is unfashionable to be optimistic, but truly, really, in my heart, mind, and belief, I am truly optimistic about my country. Thank you very much for your patience.
From telling us about audible secularism to appealing to all of us to not blame India for the sins of Indians. That was wise advice, even sagely. But that was to be expected coming from Mr. Akbar. Thank you so much, Mr. Akbar, for such a forward-looking and such a wise one.